The Matthews family was woken early by a knock that echoed through their quiet home. Sarah, the youngest, opened the front door to find a plain envelope lying on the doormat. As their mother, Lisa, approached with coffee in hand, Sarah handed her the envelope, confused. "It's from the HOA," she said, her brow furrowing. Curiosity quickly turned to dread as Lisa tore it open. The room grew silent. "They've taken Max," she finally said, her voice trembling. "They claim he was roaming." But Max had never left the yard. A sturdy fence surrounded their beloved companion, a German shepherd with a heart as big as his bark. "This can't be happening," she muttered, frustration boiling over. "Let me see that." James, Sarah's older brother, reached for the letter. His anger was palpable as he read aloud the HOA's formal language, which dripped with self-righteousness. "We have taken possession of your dog due to repeated violations of community regulations." The sound of those words hung in the air like a dark cloud. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with worry. James slammed the letter down on the table. "We contact animal control. We have to get Max back." The urgency in his voice urged the family into action. They divided their tasks. Lisa would call the HOA, while James and Sarah would scour the neighborhood for any leads. Hours turned into a chaotic blur of phone calls and frantic searches, but every route led to a dead end. The HOA offered no answers, their smuggle authority shutting down every attempt to appeal. "Max is out there, and we'll find him," James vowed, driven by a sense of urgency that felt like a ticking clock. Days passed, and the desperation settled like a weight on their chests. Each search yielded nothing, and the absence of their loyal friend left a palpable void in the home. Then, a glimmer of hope appeared. James received a call from a reliable friend who had heard whispers about a dog matching Max's description seen far away, in a rundown area across the state. "Jake, we can't let this go," he declared, determination strong in his voice. Knowing well that they had to act, Jake packed his belongings without delay. He couldn't shake the image of Max's hopeful eyes from his mind. "Hold tight, buddy," he whispered to himself as he set off on the treacherous journey, with each mile amplifying his resolve. As he drove into the unknown, uncertainty pricked at him. Who would hold Max captive? What would he find at the end of this road? Each question pushed Jake faster, his heart racing with the thought of saving his brother's dog. He swore to himself that he wouldn't return without Maximum. The closer he got, the more the urgency of his mission took hold. Little did he know, the fight for Max was just around the corner, a fight that would test their family's courage and unravel the very foundation of the HOA's authority. The whispers of the community were growing louder, and Jake could sense change in the air. But first, he had to find Max. As he neared the location detailed in the tip, anticipation mixed with dread. Deep into an area he'd never visited, surrounded by dense woods and run-down shacks, Jake slowed down. Something pulled at his gut. It was time to find out if Max was still waiting for him. Each moment felt like an eternity, and just then, he spotted it, a flicker of movement that sent shockwaves through his entire being. There it was, an old, weather-beaten shack hidden away, and by its side, his loyal companion, Max, chained and alone. "Max!" he shouted, rushing forward. But as Jake reached for the chain, voices rose behind him, the overwhelming presence of authority looming as the HOA arrived with a vengeance. "Max!" Jake shouted, rushing forward. But as he reached for the chain, voices rose behind him. The overwhelming presence of authority loomed as the HOA representatives, their faces twisted with indignation, emerged from the trees. They had been waiting, ready to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "Step away from that dog," barked one of the leaders, a stout man with a clipboard. "That animal is property of the HOA. We have the right to seize him for trespassing." "Seize him?" Jake's voice trembled with anger. "You have no right to take him from my brother. You can't just chain him up like this." He looked down at Max, whose eyes flickered with recognition. The gentle wag of his tail conflicted with his obviously weak condition. "Property? This is a living being," Jake exclaimed, moving closer. "Max is not just some possession you can claim and abandon. Return him to me." The representatives exchanged glances, the demeanor calculated and cold. "We were doing you a favor, Jake. Your brother was neglecting him. We had no choice but to intervene," the stout man insisted, his gaze hardening. "No choice." Jake's heart raced as the others closed in, encircling him. "You took him across state lines. You have no idea what you've done to my family." The frustration surged through him, a mix of indignation and fear for Max's safety. "Enough!" the stout man shouted, raising his hand like it was a gavel. "We will not stand here and allow you to impede our authority. Step back, or we will call the authorities." Jake hesitated, assessing the sea of faces. He could feel the weight of their combined authority, but Max needed him. Gathering every ounce of courage, he reached for Max's collar, unbuckling the rusted chain in one swift motion. The moment the chain fell away, Max leaped into Jake's arms, nuzzling against him as if trying to understand the whirlwind around them. The HOA men's composure shifted, fury surfacing like a tidal wave. "If you think you can just take him and walk away, you're sorely mistaken," one of them yelled, but Jake was already moving, getting Max to his feet and racing towards his truck parked just up the gravel path. "Jake, get in!" he yelled, opening the door. Max stumbled slightly, but the sound of his brother's voice spurred him forth. In a flurry of adrenaline, they jumped into the vehicle. The engine roared to life, and with a squeal of tires, they sped down the narrow road. "Did you see the way they were treating him?" Jake gasped, glancing at Max, who was panting heavily in the back seat. "I can't believe they thought they could actually keep him." The adrenaline faded, replaced by a wave of worry. Max looked frail, his fur matted and dirty. "We need to get you home, buddy. I'm so sorry for what you've been through," Jake murmured, reaching back to scratch Max behind the ears, trying to comfort him in the chaos of emotions swinging within him. As they hit the main road, a realization struck Jake like a lightning bolt. This was just the beginning. They hadn't just stolen Max. They had violated his family's rights in the process. The fight wouldn't stop here. It couldn't. Once they arrived back home, Jake hurried Max inside, immediately assessing the situation. The place felt lifeless without the usual bounce of their beloved dog, and the tension still hung in the air. James, waiting anxiously, rushed in as the door swung open. "Did you get him?" he asked breathlessly, his eyes darting between Jake and Max. Jake nodded, barely able to contain his anger. "But it's not over. The HO, they're going to try to take him again. We have to stand up to them." James clenched his fists. "They can't just take our dog. We need proof of what they did, and we need to spread the word about this." As the gravity of their situation settled in, the brothers joined forces, brainstorming ideas about how to fight back against the HOA. They would need to gather evidence and rally support from their neighbors, folks who had been victimized before. But first, Max needed care. His health and spirits were far more important. Together, they loaded up the family van, deciding to make a visit to the veterinarian. It was a start, a step towards healing not just for Max, but for the entire family. As they drove, Jake's mind raced with thoughts of justice and what it would take to protect Max and their rights as pet owners. Deep within him lay a growing determination, a fire ignited by the injustices faced, now propelling them forward into a fight they could not ignore. As they pulled into the veterinary clinic parking lot, Jake's heart raced. Max lay panting in the back seat, his frame frail and tired. "I'll get him," Jake said, immediately jumping out of the van. He opened the back door and gently lifted Max into his arms, carrying him toward the entrance. The dog looked up at him with trust, and it filled Jake with a mix of determination and despair. Inside, the vet was quick to assess Max's condition. "Is dehydrated and malnourished," Dr. Chen stated, her brow furrowing as she examined the dog. "We'll need to run some tests and start him on fluids." While they waited, Jake and James filled Dr. Chen in on what had happened. Their anger was palpable as they recounted the events. "They treated him like a piece of property," Jake said, his voice rising. "We can't let them get away with this." Dr. Chen listened intently. "You're right to be concerned. This is a violation of many animal rights laws. You may want to document everything. Photos, any evidence of how he was treated. It could become important in your fight against the HOA. As the vet took Max into the back for treatment, the brothers sat in a quiet corner of the clinic, the weight of the world pressing down on them. What if they come after us? James asked, anxiety etched on his face. We need a plan. We can't just sit back and wait for them to strike again. Let's gather support, Jake replied, his mind racing through the neighborhood. People need to know that they aren't the only ones targeted by the HOA. We can't be the only ones who've suffered under their rules. With renewed purpose, they left the clinic once Max was stabilized, planning to organize a neighborhood meeting. They spent the entire evening drafting flyers and posting them around their suburban community, each word more potent than the last. By sunset, a sense of camaraderie filled their hearts. People began reaching out, sharing their own stories of frustration and fear about the overreach of the HOA. The following day, a modest crowd gathered in their backyard, curiosity and concern flickering on their faces. James stood on a makeshift platform made from a repurposed ladder, the gathered friends and neighbors watching intently. We've all dealt with them, James began, his voice steady. The HOA thinks they can decide what we do with our lives, with our homes, and even our pets. We cannot let this continue. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Jake took his turn, eyeing the faces of their friends and neighbors. We need to stand united. If we gather enough evidence and present it, we can hold the HOA accountable for their actions. It'll show them they can't threaten us anymore. The group erupted into discussions, ideas flowing like water. They would band together, share experiences, and document every misstep the HOA had taken. A sense of empowerment washed over them. It was as though they were finally taking control of their lives. As the meeting concluded, one neighbor, a woman named Carla, stepped forward, a mix of determination and fear in her eyes. I've been meaning to speak up. They tried to seize my cat last year, claiming I didn't have the proper paperwork. I was too scared to fight back. Encouraged by her bravery, others chimed in, revealing similar tales of intimidation. Each story only further fueled their collective resolve, solidifying the group into a coalition ready to take action. They took notes, planned follow-ups, and agreed to gather evidence over the coming weeks, fully embracing their newfound purpose. With each passing day, Jake and James felt the momentum building. They began to collect documentation, capturing incidents where the HOA had exerted its authority unfairly against other residents. But as they pressed forward, a dark storm cloud lingered. Max's health was still fragile. Just as they began to feel like they were making progress, a new twist awaited them. On one fateful afternoon, a knock echoed at the door, and when Jake opened it, his heart sank. Standing there were representatives from the HOA, armed with their demands and a threatening ultimatum. This time, they intended to take the fight to court. The battle against the HOA was about to escalate, and the stakes were higher than ever. What would they do now? The weight of the HOA representatives' presence pressed heavily upon Jake as they stood in the doorway, their smug smiles grating against the urgency of the moment. We're here to discuss your defiance, the stout man intoned, his voice dripping with condescension. It seems you believe you can rally the neighborhood against us, but we assure you, this will not end well for you. Jake's heart raced, but he forced himself to meet the man's gaze, a steady resolve replacing his initial shock. You've already crossed the line by taking maximum. You can't intimidate us into silence anymore. We've got stories, people willing to speak up, and we won't back down. The representative smirked, glancing at his cohorts as if Jake's words were nothing more than a joke. Oh, we've heard the rumors circulating the neighborhood. But make no mistake, we intend to take legal action against you all for slander and for encouraging this coalition, he said, emphasizing the word with disdain. Our attorneys will be in touch. With that, they turned to leave, but Jake wasn't finished. You think this is over? We will show you how serious we are. It's time the neighborhood stands together against your tactics. As the door closed behind them, Jake felt a rush of adrenaline. The threats from the HOA only solidified their cause. This was no longer just about Max. It was about standing up for all the families living under the shadow of the HOA's tyranny. "Jake!" James called from the kitchen, where he had been eavesdropping. "What are we going to do?" The pounding on my door shattered the afternoon's peace. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed in my chest as I wiped the water from my brow, blinking against the sun. 2 police officers stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp as they locked onto mine. "Sir, we've received a complaint about you," one said, his voice firm and unwavering. A knot twisted in my stomach. "A complaint? About me?" I echoed, incredulous. "Yes," the other officer chimed in, flipping through his notepad. "Your neighbor claims you're a fugitive on the run." My mind went blank. A fugitive? In my own home? No, that's ridiculous. I stammered. This was just a mistake, an absurd mix-up. But then I heard her voice, sharper than the officer's. "Is dangerous. Arrest him." I turned to see Shirley, my new neighbor, arms crossed and contorted in faux outrage. I couldn't believe it. How had we gone from awkward introductions to outright accusations in a matter of days? "We need to assess the situation," one officer said, but I could tell they were skeptical. All of this felt like a bad dream. I took a breath, my heart racing. "You can't be serious. I've lived here for 5 years. I've never caused trouble." The officers glanced at each other, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Do you have any proof of residence?" Proof? I never had to show that before. I stepped back, trying to gather my thoughts. "I'll get my ID and some bills." As I ran inside, I felt her eyes on me, a predator ready to pounce. When I returned with my driver's license and utility bills, the officers reluctantly examined them. "Everything checks out," one of them muttered, glancing between me and Shirley, who was still simmering with anger. "There's no issue here," the second officer said firmly, attempting to defuse the situation. But Shirley wasn't ready to back down. "He's tricking you. He's not supposed to be here." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and my blood boiled. I wanted to scream that I was the victim here, yet the officers were already turning to leave, shaking their heads at her madness. I shut the door, heart racing, but my relief didn't last long. This wasn't going to end with a simple dismissal. I could see it in her eyes as she stood there, seething. This was only the start of what would undoubtedly become a nightmare I couldn't escape. I couldn't shake the fear that I was being hunted in my own home, a stranger casting shadows over my peaceful life. But one thing was clear. Shirley wasn't going to let this go. That night, I lay awake, heart pounding, thoughts racing. I tried to convince myself that this was just an isolated incident, that things would settle down. But deep down, I knew Shirley was far from finished. My mind drifted to the past 5 years, where every day had been a simple routine of work, relaxation, and community. No drama, just peace. And I had no idea how much that was about to shatter. Then, I recalled how Shirley had barely smiled during our first meeting, how her eyes held a trace of suspicion as she assessed me like I was the problem. Maybe I had unwittingly stepped into a trap. As days went by, her presence grew more suffocating. I began noticing little things, neighbors avoiding my gaze, whispers that sent chills down my spine. It all spiraled quickly out of control, her campaign against me inching forward like a creeping vine, wrapping around everything I'd built. And then, one evening, it happened again. Shirley stood at the edge of her yard, an eerie grin plastered across her face. I could feel the tension building, a storm brewing behind her blue eyes. "You're making a mistake, Keith," she called out, her tone mocking. "Excuse me." I shot back, trying to hold my ground. "Everyone's watching you," she smirked, leaning against her fence. "You should be careful." My heart raced as I tried to make sense of her words. What could she possibly mean? I was still processing the earlier confrontation when, just like that, her demeanor shifted. "Maybe I'll help them understand," she added, a wicked glint in her eyes as she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me dumbfounded. I had no idea what she had in store for me, but it was evident I was about to be embroiled in her twisted game, and I needed to prepare for whatever was coming. My life was about to plunge into a darkness I couldn't have anticipated, I had to find a way to fight back before it was too late. Shirley had declared war, and now I had no choice but to gear up for a battle that would shake the very foundation of my existence. As I stood there, the weight of her words sank in like a stone in my stomach. Shirley was not just an unfriendly neighbor. She was a threat, and the games she was playing were about to take a darker turn. I had spent years cultivating peace in my life, and this woman was hell-bent on uprooting it for reasons I couldn't fathom. The following days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I began to notice more strange behavior from Shirley, a slow, methodical campaign of surveillance. Each time I ventured into my backyard, I could almost feel her eyes drilling into me from behind her drawn curtains. It was exhausting, and the idea that I was becoming the neighborhood pariah weighed on me like a lead blanket. One morning, as I was sipping coffee and trying to gather my thoughts, I caught sight of her again. But this time, there was something different. I observed her standing motionless in her front yard, her phone poised at chest level, pointing directly at my house. Something about her stance sent a chill down my spine. What the hell is she doing now? I muttered under my breath. It was as if she was documenting my every move. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I made my way toward my back door, determination blooming. I had to confront her again. This wouldn't go on any longer. With each step, I steeled myself for whatever twisted reasoning would come next. "Shirley," I called out as I stepped onto her driveway. "What are you doing?" My voice wavered, but it was underscored with firmness. She looked up, surprised, but then that same malicious smirk crept across her face. "Just collecting evidence," she said smoothly, as if that made any sense. "Evidence of what? You're acting paranoid. I haven't done anything wrong." My patience was fraying as I fought to keep anger from bubbling over. She shrugged, her indifference palpable. "You never know when you might need proof of suspicious activity." Before I could retort, I noticed a strange look in her eyes, half amusement, half something darker. It hit me like ice water. She enjoyed this. I was nothing more than a pawn in her game, and the thrill of capturing me in some act of wrongdoing spurred her on. "What are you going to do? Call the cops again?" I shot back, trying to project confidence even as fear curled in my gut. "You don't have a leg to stand on." "Who said anything about calling the cops?" she said, tilting her head as if I was missing the bigger picture. "They're not the only ones watching." My heart raced as I backpedaled, searching the space between us for any sign of what she meant. The idea that others were involved, neighbors I'd known for years, sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through me. Before I could respond, she raised her phone, the camera catching me in its lens. Instinctively, I stepped back, unsure of what she was capturing. "Stop taking evidence," she interrupted nonchalantly. "You know, neighborhood safety and all." Fury bubbled inside me, but I knew I couldn't give her satisfaction. I spun on my heel, returning to the sanctuary of my backyard, but it felt less safe than before. I needed a plan. I couldn't just let her turn the entire neighborhood against me. After a long, restless night, I resolved to compile evidence of my own. I contacted Mr. Patel, genuinely hoping to find a comrade who had seen through her ruse. When I arrived at his house, he was waiting outside, an understanding look on his face. "You okay, Keith?" he asked, concern etched in the lines of his forehead. "Not really," I replied, exhaling deeply. "I need your help. I think Shirley's trying to make me look bad and turn everyone against me." Mr. Patel nodded grimly. I figured something was off. I've seen her lurking around, acting erratically. It's not right. With that statement, a flicker of hope ignited within me. "Do you think you could share the footage from your security cameras? It might help establish a pattern of harassment." "Of course, let's check it out." He led me inside, and the moment was settled in front of the screen, I felt my heart race with anticipation. I had to see the proof. As the footage started playing, I felt a pit deepen in my stomach. There she was, Shirley slipping through my yard late at night, her phone flashing as if she was taking pictures of anything she could. She peeked into my windows, even reaching a hand out to tug at some of the leaves from my flower bed. A steady stream of disbelief washed over me. "This is unreal," I muttered, shaking my head. She needs to be stopped. Just wait. It gets worse, Mr. Patel said, fast-forwarding to another clip that showed her again, this time standing beneath the cover of night, an uncharacteristically predatory gleam in her eyes. She was pacing in front of my fence, whispering to herself, as if concocting a malevolent plot. Do you think she's dangerous? I asked, worried. You should definitely go to the police with this, he urged, and I felt a surge of anger at the thought of having to drag this ordeal back into the legal realm. But what choice did I have? The next day, I returned to the police station, stomach knotted tightly. As I showed the footage to an officer, I felt a mixture of defiance and dread wash over me. This is serious, the officer said after watching the clips. You've got clear evidence of harassment and possibly stalking here. I just want her to stop, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to feel safe in my own home. As the officer began to take notes, a sense of grim satisfaction swelled within me. For the first time in weeks, it felt like I was taking control back. But I could still feel Shirley's presence looming over me, a dark shadow I couldn't shake. I had to stay vigilant. After my meeting with the officer, I headed back home, knowing that, deep down, this fight was far from over. My peaceful existence had been shattered, and I was about to be dragged into a deeper confrontation with Shirley. But I wouldn't back down. I'd stand firm and face whatever darkness lay ahead. The stakes were high, and I was ready to confront the nightmare she had unleashed. As I sat in my living room that evening, the reality of my situation began to weigh heavily on my shoulders. I had taken the first step by involving the police, but I knew that Shirley wouldn't back down easily. She was relentless, and I could almost feel her looming presence, plotting her next move. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, but I kept my guard up. Every time I stepped outside, I felt as if I was entering a battlefield. My eyes darted from corner to corner, searching for any sign of her, and it didn't take long before I got a sign. One afternoon, as I reviewed the footage from Mr. Patel's camera, I spotted something unusual. There was Shirley again, standing at the edge of my property, but this time she wasn't alone. A group of neighbors stood with her, people I once thought were friends. Their heads turned toward my house, whispers rippling through the air. My heart sank as I realized she was still spreading her venom. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, and I opened it cautiously. It was Mrs. Turner, one of the few neighbors who hadn't completely turned against me. Her expression was conflicted, and I felt a mix of hope and despair. "Keith, can we talk? I've heard some things," she began, fidgeting with her hands. "What exactly have you heard?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Shirley's been telling everyone you're a criminal. I don't believe it." But her words trailed off, leaving the unspoken doubts lingering in the air between us. "I'm not a criminal, Mrs. Turner. I've lived here for years." I could feel my frustration rising. "I'm just trying to protect my home from her lies." I know, she said quickly. "But she's persuasive, and now some people think they need to keep an eye on you." A wave of anger surged within me. How can they believe her? I've never done anything wrong. She lowered her gaze, guilt washing over her face. People like to believe the worst, especially when someone else is telling them what to think. "Can you help me?" I asked, my voice tightening with desperation. "If you can talk to others, maybe explain what's really happening." "I will," she promised, her resolve shining through. "But you need to be careful. If Shirley is orchestrating something, you don't want to give her any reason to escalate." Just as she spoke those words, a distant commotion outside caught my attention. I peered out the window and saw Shirley talking animatedly with a group of people, my neighbors, gathering like a lynch mob, pointing toward my house. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let them dismiss me as a threat in my own home. "Stay here. I'm going out," I said firmly, but Mrs. Turner grabbed my arm, concern etched on her face. "Do you really think that's wise? You shouldn't confront her alone. I need to put a stop to this before it gets worse." I insisted, shaking off her grip and marching outside. As I approached the group, The murmurs quieted, and all eyes turned toward me. Shirley's smug expression was a window to her enjoyment of the chaos she had sown. Well, look who decided to join us, she said, a mocking smile dancing on her lips. What's this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. You're spreading lies about me? Do you think this is a joke? Her expression changed as she feigned innocence. Oh, poor Keith. We're just discussing community safety. You know, the concerns that have arisen. I clenched my fists. Concerns you created. Before she could reply, several neighbors stepped forward. We're just looking out for our families, said one man I'd greeted countless times at the mailboxes. We can't take any chances. Chance? You're blindly following her. I felt a surge of frustration breaking through. If you think I pose any real threat, then let's address this. I'm not some villain in a movie. I'm your neighbor. I want nothing more than to live peacefully. The crowd murmured, uncertainty creeping into the air. Shirley took a step back, her grin faltering slightly. Keith, I think we should all take a step back, Mrs. Turner chimed in, joining me at my side. This isn't the way to handle things. Let's take this to a discussion, away from. No. Shirley interrupted, her voice sharp. You all need to see the truth. He is the real danger. I could see the skepticism in the eyes of some neighbors. Shirley, I said through clenched teeth, all you've done is spread lies. You've watched me from your window, invaded my privacy. Evidence, she shouted, raising her phone as if it was a weapon. People need to know what's going on. Evidence of what? I counted, facing the crowd, trying to regain their trust. My life has been turned upside down because of her claims. I've done nothing wrong. You're being manipulated. The tension hung thick in the air, and for a moment, I thought I saw the shift in some faces. Doubt, confusion. It felt like the scales were tipping. But before I could press my advantage, Shirley's expression hardened. If you all want a real danger, look no further than him, she spat. I'm just protecting our community. Suddenly, she spun on her heel and marched away, leaving the group to whisper among themselves. The atmosphere shifted as some of my neighbors seemed to pull back, uncertainty overtaking anger. Don't listen to her, I said urgently, trying to seize the moment. I'm here to protect this community too. But deep down, I knew I had to do more than just defend myself with words. I had to gather solid proof, something that couldn't be twisted by Shirley's lies. And then it hit me. I needed to confront her in a way that would expose her for everyone to see. That evening, I started planning, determined to gather evidence of my own. I could record her behavior, gather witness testimonies, anything to show that I was the victim in this tormenting saga. I had to prove my innocence and end her reign of terror once and for all. But as I sat in my backyard that night, the chilling sound of laughter echoed from Shirley's house. I glanced over to see her through the window, a triumphant look on her face as she shared a drink with my former neighbors. The realization hit me. I was sitting on the precipice of war with a woman who had no conscience. I was determined to fight back. This was about more than just me. This was a fight for the life I had built, marred by the threat she posed. There was no going back. I would expose her lies and take back my life. The battle was heating up, and I would stand my ground. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and resolve. I became hyper-focused, turning my home into a fortress of vigilance. I set up multiple cameras around my property, ensuring that every angle was covered, capturing not just the activity around my house but, ultimately, Shirley's encroachment on my life. I enlisted the help of Mrs. Turner, who agreed to act as my ally in watching for any bizarre behavior from Shirley. On the second night of monitoring, the air was thick with tension. The cameras were rolling, and I positioned myself by the living room window, waiting for any sign of her disquieting antics. It felt like I was trapped in a real-life thriller, body buzzing with both anxiety and determination. Just when I thought friction in the air had settled, I caught the glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I squinted through the darkness. There she was, standing at the edge of my property, her silhouette barely illuminated by the moonlight. I reached for my camera, and as I recorded, I could barely contain the surge of adrenaline that coursed through me. She murmured to herself, hands gesturing in elaborate motions, her demeanor reminiscent of a mad scientist plotting chaos. I held my breath, mounting dread clawing at my insides as she produced her phone, the screen lighting up in an ethereal glow. "Don't you dare," I whispered to myself, watching as she seemingly captured whatever thoughts danced through her mind. I pressed record and continued documenting every unsettling moment of a nightly ritual, certain that it was only a matter of time before I'd have the evidence I needed to showcase her true colors. Within moments, Shaylee appeared to spot something in the distance. A rustling in the bushes, perhaps? She turned abruptly, her expression flickering between fear and fury. It was then that I noticed a glint of metal in her hand. It wasn't just her phone. My stomach dropped as the realization hit. Was she preparing for something sinister? Fueled by equal parts courage and apprehension, I made a decision. I couldn't let the night pass without confronting her. I needed to know what she was up to. Without another thought, I stepped out into the cool air, the sensation of the grass beneath my feet grounding me. "Shirley," I called out, my voice echoing in the quiet neighborhood. She froze, a deer caught in headlights, the phone slipping from her grip before she quickly gathered herself. "What are you doing here?" she spat, masking her surprise with irritation. "Why are you lurking in my yard?" I demanded, stepping closer but keeping a watchful distance. "What is this really about?" She raised her chin defiantly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her bravado. "This is none of your business, Keith. You should stay away." With a fiery resolve, I brandished my phone. "What's your evidence, Shirley? Because I have proof of your little night escapade." I waved my phone in front of her, and her expression darkened. Panic flashed in her eyes, and for a moment, I had the upper hand. "You think you can intimidate me? I know what you're doing." "Intimidate? No, I'm here to expose you. You've crossed a line, and I'm tired of being a target." For a moment, we squared off, two opposing forces ready to explode. Behind me, I sensed others peeking from their windows, curious about the commotion escalating between us. The very audience I had hoped to draw in, and now, I had to make it count. "Keith is right." Mrs. Turner's voice bassed out from behind me, as she stepped into the light, emboldened despite the tension crackling through the air. "We're done letting you spread lies." The neighborly support emboldened me. Fueled by adrenaline, I turned back to Shirley. "I have everything documented. You're the one causing all the chaos in our community. This ends now." She sputtered, a flurry of half-hearted defenses spilling from her lips, but the shifting reactions of the gathered crowd indicated that the tide was turning. People began whispering among themselves, sharing their own experiences with her stalking behavior, feelings of uneasiness that had crept into their homes. Suddenly, the mood shifted. Someone stepped forward from the crowd. It was Mr. Patel. "I've seen her, too. She's been unhinged for weeks, lurking, watching," he declared, and his voice lit a fire among the others. More neighbors chimed in, sharing what they had witnessed. Each new voice painted a clearer picture of the turmoil she created. "Why do you think I put cameras up?" I shouted, adrenaline surging. "To protect myself from her madness." Her facade crumbled, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of victory. Shirley's eyes darted around, grasping for a lifeline that wasn't there. She quickly turned on us, desperation creeping into her tone. "I was just looking out for everyone. I'm the one who cares." But the crowd was no longer buying her story. I seized the moment to speak louder. "You've been a menace, Shirley. This needs to stop. I won't let you intimidate me any longer." Just like that, a wave of solidarity surged through the crowd. The people I had once thought were allies to Shirley now turned against her. The tide had shifted, and her power dissipated like smoke in the wind. With her mask slipping, Shirley's voice trembled as she hissed, "You'll regret this." I stood my ground, unyielding. "No, Shirley, you'll regret underestimating the strength of this community. We're done living in fear." The cacophony of certain voices rose, echoing in agreement. Shirley's facade cracked completely, and she realized that her game was over. She backed away slowly, like a wounded animal cornered, before finally turning on her heel and vanishing into the shadows that cloaked her. Once she was gone, a wave of relief washed over me. I scanned the faces of my neighbors, astonished at the newfound camaraderie that had blossomed in the midst of chaos. With Shirley no longer posing a threat, we were united, ready to rebuild and foster the peace we had longed for. As I looked around, I knew the battle had strengthened the bonds of our community. We gathered on my porch, sharing stories and laughter, free from the phantom of Shirley's shadow. In that moment, I finally felt a sense of closure. The uncertainty no longer loomed overhead. I had fought back, and together, we could reclaim our lives, a fresh start blossoming amidst the remnants of turmoil. We were ready for whatever came next, stronger than ever before.